Is my one back to front now? How's that happen?
Yeah, so I'm so sorry. I need some. I'm one of the oldest here. I need.
Michael, it should be there it should be there in the webinar invite.
Yeah, I found it. And then what do I do with it?
Maybe just save that on your desktop and then click next to your video. You'll see a small arrow next to your video. You just click on that. Can you see it? Where you have your video icon at the bottom on the left-hand side.
Where it says stop video.
Say stop video. Yes, indeed.
So there's an arrow next to it.
Arrow next to it. Okay.
So you can click on choose virtual background.
Okay, I see. Choose. Okay. For a filtre.
And then right below where your image is, you would see a small plus on the right-hand side to add the image. You found it?
Sorry.
That's okay. So once you click choose virtual background, you would see your video and then at the bottom, you would see some background options. Under virtual background, you have, the first one is none, and then blur. Do you see that, Michael?
Yes, I see the none, and
there's blur next.
And so, blur next, yep.
And on the rightmost side, you would see a plus sign.
No, I don't have the plus.
Oh, is it? Okay.
There will be very small icon.
No, I can't. I don't have the plus. Really sorry.
Okay.
Okay, so I apologize. Maybe.
It's fine. I think go ahead. It's fine.
We don't use Zoom. We use Teams normally. So Teams, I can do it, but with Zoom, I'm.
No problem.
No. Yeah.
Hi guys. Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
So we are live now. Sandeep, you can start.
Himanshu, a minute, and after brief, we'll start the one. Mr. Sudhir, what I request. I'll give a brief introduction for the welcome remarks and also for the participants about the flow of the agenda.
Mm-hmm.
I'll show the speaker profiles also. I'll read out for Mr. Srinivas, I'll read out for you. And then once you take over, I'll also project the speaker profiles of the remaining panelists. And then you can go on your flow, and then we'll proceed after that. So that is fine.
And if anyone wants to share a slide or something, Sandeep, is that possible or it's not possible?
Yeah, they can do it. Everybody is having the rights to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
And yeah, and we have my colleague Pallavi also joined this particular one.
Right.
An announcement to all the panelists here. The audience are in the CI Hive platform. Okay. They post questions in that particular platform, where here panelists cannot see them, but my colleague Pallavi would transfer the Q&A from the audience, from the Hive platform, and post it. Okay?
Okay.
Yeah, I suggest Mr. Sudhir to take up which question is to which panelist.
Okay, sure.
Sandeep, I am joined just now, sir.
Yes, sir. We are going to start right now, sir. Himanshu, hope we can start. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this session on integrated urban energy systems for green buildings. This particular session is a part of the pre-event program of Green Building Congress. This session has been exclusively organized in support of Tabreed, which is the premium supporter of the Green Building Congress 2021. Before we go deep dive into this session, wanted to give a small announcement about the Green Building Congress, which is 19-20 of November, of 3 days of international conference, and also parallelly happening an virtual expo on green building technologies, projects, products, and as well as services, followed by a Green Pro session also on 20th November. The Green Building Congress is shaping up very well. We have supporters for the program. Also, many green building councils across the country, across the globe, been supporting the Green Building Congress. I suggest all the participants to remember the dates 18, 19, 20 of November and do join us back. Now, the main session, Integrated Urban Energy Systems for Green Buildings. A very brief on the agenda. We're going to start the program with the welcome remarks from Mr. S. Srinivas, who is the Principal Advisor of IGBC. And the session moderator, Mr. Sudhir Perla, who is the Country Manager, India, Tabreed, and followed by the panel discussion with Mr. Prashant Kapoor, Mr. Benjamin Hickman, Ms. Shruti Narayan, Ms. Dushyant Ahuja, Mr. Michael Shah, followed by Q&A. At 4:25, I suggest participants at 4:25, you'll have the Q&A sessions would be discussed. During the session, whenever the participants feel there's a question that you want to ask to the panelists, in the right side top, there's an icon called Q&A. In the right side, small icon called Q&A. I suggest all the participants to post your queries in the Q&A box, so the panelists would answer at 4:25 for your questions. Without further delay, let me introduce Mr. S. Srinivas, who is the Principal Advisor and who is heading the Green Building Division of the Center, and is having more than 34 years of experience and in the areas of project design and consultancy, and he's helping architects, builders, corporates in designing green buildings, and more than 400 clients in incorporating green designs in building construction, and also done more than 180 training programs, not only in India, but also beyond the country. With this short introduction, I welcome Mr. S. Srinivas to deliver the welcome remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Sandeep. What a wonderful day today is, especially from the green building point of view. I'm just coming out of 2 jury meetings, one on design competition for the architectural students, one on performance challenge in terms of operational buildings, and there is parallelly a net zero carbon rating discussion going on, and this meeting on the urban energy systems, especially the district cooling systems. I think this panel and this event has come at the right time, especially when the whole world is talking about net zero, and what we are going to discuss today here will have a lot of impacts in terms of contributions to the net zero vision itself. I think India has aggressively made commitments at the COP26, and I'm sure technologies like district cooling systems will have a larger role to play in the coming years. I think, last 20 years we have been working on the green building concepts for the sustainable built environment, for the built environment as such. I think next 20 years, I think 20 to 30 years would be on the net zero. I think that is the trend that I see actually. So green buildings, to a large extent, I think we have reached most of the stakeholders. We have penetrated all forms and typologies of buildings. And today, India is at about 7.86 billion square foot of registered buildings from 6,500 projects. And we are all well set to reach the 10 billion mark by the next year or so. So I think in terms of the net zero carbon, energy, water and waste, I think that's going to be the focus in the next 20 years. And what we are discussing in today's webinar will have a lot of impacts in all these 4 areas actually. So I'm so glad that Tabreed has agreed to be part of this. And let me also on behalf of the IGBC, welcome Mr. Sudhir Perle, who's the country manager for India. And I'm sure we'll have an exciting and a very meaningful discussion. And we have got an eminent panel to discuss on this subject today. So welcome to you all, and we look forward to the deliberations. Thank you. Over to you, Sandeep.
Thank you, Mr. Srinivas, for the welcome remarks and setting the tone for the session. Now, let me introduce our session moderator, Mr. Sudhir Perla, who is the country manager India for Tabrid. In his current role, he is responsible for leading Tabrid growth in India through developing private sector partnerships with appropriate government or public sector engagement. He is leading Tabrid's effort to invest, own, and operate cooling assets as a cooling utility to provide more sustainable long-term services in meeting the country's growing cooling demand. Having commenced his stint with Tabrid in 2009, leading its corporate finance function, he played a key role in implementing the plan.
You are breaking, Sandeep. You have some problem with your signal, I think. Sandeep? Sandeep, we are not able to hear you. I think you switch off your video. You switch off your video. Yeah.
Hope you're able to listen to me, sir.
Yeah. We couldn't listen to you for the last half a minute.
Oh, okay. You're able to hear to me now, sir?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. I was completing Mr. Sudhir Pella's introduction in terms of mentioning about his stint in Tabrid in 2009, leading its corporate finance function. He displayed a key role in implementing the company's $1.7 billion balance sheet recapitalization plan in 2011. He has successfully established the business and sustainability case for real estate developers to adopt district cooling, resulting in Tabrid investing $400 million, either acquiring or developing greenfield assets to provide long-term cooling services. With this, I invite Mr. Sudhir Pella to take over the session.
Thanks for that, Sandeep, and thanks as well, Mr. Srinivas, for inviting us here. And like you mentioned, this is an extremely important topic that we'd like to deliberate on at this point of time. And I've got a great panel to be able to discuss some of the points that we would hopefully cover around some of the points you've highlighted so far. And before going into the specific aspect of today's agenda around integrated urban energy systems, I think, like you mentioned, I want to acknowledge the progress India, under the stewardship of IGBC, has made over the last 2 decades in the green building space. I mean, like your statistics show, we already are the second largest in the world in terms of registered green building footprint, with about 7.8 billion square feet and 6,500 plus projects. It's commendable in terms of what progress the Green Building Council has enabled in India. But still, as a relative outsider and still trying to understand the market for the built environment in India, at least me personally, some of the questions I grapple with are, how green really are our buildings when they're designed for high energy performance on one hand, but still rely on polluting DG sets on the other for backup power, when they're designed for high water efficiency, but still in a lot of instances rely on truck-in water for meeting the water requirement, designed for zero discharge, but still most developments are not able to meet regulatory norms. And of course, solid waste, which could in fact be a very useful resource, also not capable of being effectively and efficiently used for power and so on and so forth, right? And finally, coming to cooling, the point you highlighted on district cooling, where cooling is the largest contributor to energy demand for a building. And still, I mean, whilst green buildings, of course, are at least pushing the envelope in terms of making sure the buildings are designed more efficiently and the cooling demand comes down, in large and most instances, we still meet cooling demand through, at best, a central system, rather than just simply aggregating demand to further enhance efficiencies and basically have concepts like district cooling and so on and so forth, right? So I think, I mean, it looks like, I mean, from, again, like I said, as an outsider, whilst we are making good progress individually within each buildings to try and make them more greener and work with the limitations of the system that we have, there still could be possibly a lot more market models that could be adopted, which can push the envelope beyond what is currently being done to truly move towards having a much more climate resilient, climate friendly, cost effective communities and buildings. Right. So that with that context in mind, and just to also probably, set a bit more background on what we refer to as integrated urban energy systems that we will cover through this through the discussion. Maybe what I'll do is just share a slide that I came across in a recent UNEP presentation that actually, in fact, Benjamin made, to just kind of highlight what we mean by integrated urban energy systems. This is again going beyond the concept of district cooling alone, right? And is my screen clear? Yeah. Okay. So I think what we want to explore through this panel discussion is basically moving the conversation from just what is happening at a building level to a more system level aspect, and seeing how best, using irrespective of regulation catching up or not, are there market models, are there business models, and are there ways and means by which a more integrated approach could be adopted to be able to push the envelope in terms of what green buildings are, right? And this, I'm sure many of you would have seen it in many instances, right? And basically, still in large parts, our energy systems are still siloed, they're centralized, led nationally, they're very linear. And given the nature of the silos that they are right now, it limits efficiencies and it's still largely demand driven. And whilst we're making good progress on the supply side of greening the grid, what is still missing from an urban standpoint is having systems that could be a more hybrid model. They can be decentralized with multi-level governance, incorporating a lot more of circular economy principles into them, being a lot more resource efficient, and essentially tapping in the benefits that you have through this interconnected approach and having circular economy principles coming in to essentially use our resources in a more effective way. And of course, and enhance the resilience and also, of course, the cost at which these green buildings are built and so on, right? So this is the broad context of what I'd like to cover through this discussion. Without wasting further time, I'm going to dive straight in to start talking to each of our panel members out here. We've got a great list of panelists, like I said. And maybe what I'll do is, as I pose questions to each of you, I will give a bit of an introduction on some of the work that you're doing, and then probably direct a certain question to each of you, and then we can then open up for questions to audience after that, if that makes sense. Yeah. So I would start probably with Prashant. Prashant, you of course, as the Chief Industry Specialist, leading the green buildings and cities work of IFC. I would say that in many ways, you are a trailblazer of sorts. You've basically been a champion for sustainable environments. You've, in a way, whilst working for IFC, been the entrepreneur who created the EDGE platform, which beyond just certification is a tool that is freely available to mainstream resource efficient building growth. Now you've used the EDGE experience to now take it a bit further to develop, I think, what you're calling as the APEX program, right? The Advanced Practices for Environmental Excellence in Cities and so on. And this also is an app, from what I can understand right now, that cities have to be able to map out various action plans to more effectively adopt climate strategies. So given what the recent work you're doing on APEX and also on EDGE, if I could just ask you, to share certain insights on what led to the creation of your APEX online app, and what you see as the success so far on EDGE, and especially if the purpose of APEX as a tool is for cities to be able to have environmental excellence in the overall planning, which in turn extends to green buildings and also having integrated concepts like we just spoke about, right, on urban energy and so on. Where do you see, we see that cities are still struggling with capacity and technical capability gaps, right? And also there's a big issue on data in terms of availability of data, adequacy and accuracy. So given this overall context, could you just share, certain insights on what led you to the creation of the APEX app, and also your successes and failures so far, and how you'd like to see the EDGE program kind of go from here within the green building context?
Thanks, Sudhir. So I'll sort of try and come back to the questions and try to remember all of them, but I'll try to answer them one by one, because it's quite a lot to cover. But I think the main one is, why did we create APEX, right? I think from our perspective, we have very strong drive to tackle climate change. And as you know, as IFC, as a part of the World Bank Group, we invest in private sector and subnational governments as well. So we help cities when they're not sovereign backed, and we are able to support them, right? So at the back of a success with green buildings, we do close to $1 billion, actually a little bit more now than that. And, you know, so we've done like $8 billion of investments in this space, both directly with banks and in buildings across, you know, across, actually in India, we've done HDFC and others like that, right? So, but I think the opportunity seemed like, you know, what if we could actually take that model and really look at how we could bring the finance angle to really push and nudge the cities in this space. I think there's a lot that is being done by cities. I mean, you know, in terms of some great partnerships with C40 and GCOM and ICLEI and others. You know, the NGOs are really trying to push as collaborators. But I felt like the space for financial sector there is missing now. Just to step back from our perspective, you know, cities hold a tremendous potential, right, to tackle climate change. I mean, 70% of all GHGs come from cities, and also most of the GDP is produced by cities. So it's a great opportunity to not only kind of tackle climate change, but also to unlock economic opportunities and development opportunities. And we ourselves, you know, it's fairly modest, about $2.3 billion of investments at the subnational cities level in climate smart investments, but the opportunity is huge. I mean, our initial analysis shows that it's almost $30 trillion of investments that can go into cities, and buildings is the key part of that, right? You know, a significant chunk of that. But I'll come to that a little later. But I feel like, you know, but I think the conversation to some extent cannot be, I think our sense is cannot just be climate change. You know, you can't go to a city in India and say, tackle climate change. You know, they have really important issues from fixing potholes, and with COVID, it's become even more, you know, significant, right? The issues in terms of, you know, the stress they're at. So one has to really prioritize on the ground issues faced by cities, such as air pollution, congestion, energy access, water problems, waste disposal problems. I think if you're clever, whilst tackling those aspects, we can then also tackle climate change. I think, and I think your ideas of district heating, all of that fits into that conversation, right? So from our perspective, you know, that's sort of our angle, and Apex allows us to bring the best practices from across the world. You know, cities are busy trying to fix real issues, as you know, right? They don't have time to go to COP and have tea with other people and have a discussion and ponder over how they can work on this. They don't have time to even innovate in policies. And so the idea is to kind of bring an engine like Apex that brings the sort of evidence-based knowledge to the cities at their fingertips, where, you know, they can put in their context. So you don't have to collect huge amount of data. You don't have to go around, you know, finding all the different case studies and see if it will work for them, to give them the head start, to do like a pre-feasibility, but more importantly, to get a sense of how much will all of this cost. Because I think, you know, most cities don't have a luxury, but even more emerging markets, you know, don't have the luxury to waste money, and they really have to be frugal, right, in terms of how they use their resources. So if you have $1 billion, you know, over the next 10 years to spend, where should you spend to get the best bang for your buck, which is what Apex helps you with. And to go to the second question about, you know, the knowledge and capacity gap in emerging markets, I think, you know, I really think it's severe, and I don't think I have a solution. I think it'll be great to discuss this in some sort of way. It really feels like trying to fix an engine of a car whilst it's moving at 100 miles per hour, you know, so it's quite a tricky scenario that they have to deal with. But I think, you know, if we can bring there some of the best practices, for example, in Singapore here, where I'm based now, you know, they've done some really clever ways to kind of have quotas on private ownership of cars. Simple, I mean, simple in the sense, not a huge cost. Of course, it needs a lot of political will, but assuming political will can be achieved, you know, what if I could do that in my city in Bhopal, you know, or wherever else it is? So Apex allows you to do that. To take, you know, the reusing of water, almost 100% of reuse of water from window in Namibia, or Mexico City's green mortgage standard, where, you know, affordable housing is also green. You know, bringing some of the samples of those projects and those mechanisms as actions to the forefront. That's what we are really trying to position. And I think just wanted to say that, I think from what is in it for the city, as you were saying, I feel like, I think even talking about practical issues is good, but I think if we can really show, and this is our endeavor, if we can show that, by being a green city, you can be a magnet for green jobs, or be a magnet for green financing, if the cities are able to tap into financing that goes beyond their remit of government action, green bonds, and other sort of mechanisms, that could be the way to go forward. And I can go into some of the examples that we are talking about later, but I hope that sort of gives you a context.
Yeah, makes sense, Prashant. I think it completely makes sense. And I would think that, the very fact that a city could use a tool like this to be able to make more judicious, better choices, it would naturally lend itself, of course, into the overall green building agenda as well, because a lot of the reasons why, like I said, buildings probably can't be as green as they want to be is because of system level failures where you don't have reliable power, so you need backup DG sets, you don't have water access, so you need to have trucking and so on. So I think if those issues can be fixed at a macro level, it naturally would make the built environment a lot more efficient compared to what it is right now, right?
Actually, so I forgot to bring it back to the built environment, if I may. I think, and maybe, I just want to give a sense of how this is so important. It works both ways, right? I think built environment needs cities to act, through right policies, through incentives, through special project development zones where developers can benefit from that, even PPP initiatives, right, that they can tap into. But it also works the other way. We just finished this sort of climate action planning or green city action planning for a city in South Africa, and they identified about 20 things that they could do, right? And out of those 20 things, and in order to get to 25% greenhouse gas emission reduction in the next 10 years or so, right? Out of those 20 things, about 10 of them municipalities could directly control, whether financing or policies or whatever. But the other 50% is purely private sector. And, they have to, and I think when you consider that 70% of the greenhouse gas emissions comes from buildings, and if you look at private sector generally, transport, that goes between buildings, there's no way out of this where you have to kind of get the private sector and particularly developers to engage.
Sure. Thanks for that, Prashant. Yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely. Right. And so I think taking this conversation forward to the private sector, and I'll probably invite Michael from NG. Right. So now NG is a global leader in district heating and cooling networks. We've got about 19 gigawatts of capacity through 300 plus district heating and cooling networks around the world. And whilst we're still talking of district cooling in India as a possible intervention to be able to make communities more efficient and so on, way back in 91, you developed Europe's largest urban district cooling system for the city of Paris through ClimaSpace. Could you maybe share some insights on some of the challenges that you faced in making the system come to life, whether it is through building retrofits, getting easements through congested areas, and what kind of circular economy principles you adopted, and how do you upkeep the system right now and maintain it to make sure that it delivers the benefits that has been intended to from a green building plus integrated energy standpoint?
Yes, thank you, Sudhir. And with my warm thanks for the invitation, I'm very honored in this very high-level panel to be a voice from Europe. So indeed, we started operating the district cooling network of Paris as a concession contract in 1991. And it grew fairly slowly, actually. And because we connected only some five-star hotels, some museums, and some high-quality malls, because until recently, cooling was considered in France and in Paris as a luxury. So, and not a necessity. And it grew over 30 years to become now the largest cooling network in Europe. But we still have only 10 plants and 90 kilometers of networks. But we see a dramatic acceleration and due to climate change. In the past, we waited until the split systems were becoming redundant or were too old, so the customer needed to change, and then we connected. So That's why it took 30 years to reach 400 customers and 90 kilometers of network. But now that climate change is at the top of the agenda, in the new 20 years, next 20 years of a concession contract, we are very honored to recently, 10 days ago, to have won against stiff competition. We will see in 20 years, tripling of the size of the network, where we need to build 20 additional plants. And we intend in the frame of the concession contract to invest more than 1 billion euros. So it means a dramatic acceleration, and will serve a lot of hospitals, homes of the elderly, and for the first time also residential buildings, because in the eyes of the local government of Paris, now it is to cooling, and cooling is no longer a luxury, it's a necessity. What I want to highlight, which can be transposable maybe to the situation in India, are three things. The first one is energy efficiency. The second one is resiliency. And the third one is the heat island effect. Let me start with efficiency. Actually, as you're all aware, for district cooling, it's a no-brainer because it's 50%, at least 50% more efficient than individual systems. So it reduces by half the CO2 emissions. And it's one of the only ways really to improve dramatically the energy efficiency of cooling for buildings. So by the way, we have launched at COP26 with the UNEP, maybe Ben, you will allude to that, and work the urban cooling handbook, which I let you say a word against, where NG contributed some use cases, and we worked on the district cooling chapter with the Rocky Mountain Institute, and this handbook will be distributed to 10,000 cities all over the world. And I warmly encourage also, of course, Indian city to take a look, because it gives very concrete and practice ways to develop these systems. So first point, energy efficiency. I think it's the best way to improve dramatically energy efficiency for cooling. Second one is resiliency. As you might know, due to climate change, also the extreme events increase, and even in Paris, we have floods of the Seine River, for instance. And these district cooling systems are, by design, they are resilient, because it's a legacy city, Paris, like many cities in India. So the local government doesn't want to see any plants above ground. So they are all below ground, but the doors are watertight, like in a way of a submarine. They're completely automated. So even in case of flooding or extreme rains, or we don't have monsoon, but we might have some more and more extreme events. So they are operated centrally from a central dispatching. And so they are resilient to extreme climate events, which is a big safety and which is crucial when you serve hospitals or you serve museums where the works of arts can't afford to have temperature fluctuation. So that's the second aspect. Now the third one, and finish there, is the heat island effect. I'm horrified when I see maps at the end of the century where large parts of India might become unlivable due to the heat increase. And I think district cooling is one way to mitigate that. Even the old Climespace, only 90 kilometers long, is already mitigating in Paris 1.5 degrees C, the heat island effect. So after these 20 years of investment, once we have tripled the size, it will be significant and a few degrees C. So this highly efficient district cooling system, taking the heat away and putting them outside of the city, that's one help. The other is as a double energy efficiency. So they are a big help to mitigate heat island effect, and they can contribute to keep city centers in the future livable. So to summary, I would warmly encourage Indian decision makers to promote district cooling, because it doubles the energy efficiency, it mitigates, it's very resilient and mitigates extreme climate events, and it reduced the heat island effect. So I think it has the potential really to be part of the solution particularly for India.
Sure, thanks for that, Michael. And I just want to delve a little bit more into some of the points that you mentioned, right? I mean, so in terms of the investments you said you're going to be making from this point onwards of €1 billion plus. So here, how does this model work? And again, just to apply this within the Indian context, is it that a player like NG reaches out to each building, proposes them to retrofit their building to connect to the system, and then as a result of them aligning with it and making sure that there are cost savings for them, because that's going to be paramount, I mean, along with everything else, right? I mean, you undertake retrofits, and then as the retrofits happen, then expand the system, I mean, step by step? And what role does the city play in this? Is it like a PPP concession, or is it more like you as a private player build, own, execute, operate, and provide a long-term service on the basis of concurrence from each and every individual building you have a conversation with to connect to the system? And how are you approaching this?
Yes, indeed, Sudhir. We have two types of contract. We have a concession contract with the city of Paris, which gives us the exclusive possibility to develop district cooling. And they help us because district cooling, the networks are either in technical galleries or are underground, or we are under 40% are in the sewers of the city. So the city helps us deploy it, and we pay a fee for this, of course. So the city gets significant revenue from this concession contract. So that's one part. Then, as you explained, which is absolutely correct, we have contracts with each building. And so we have, it has to bring value to the building owner or operator. So it has to be not more expensive. If you have the full costs, it needs to be similar in price than individual split systems. It doesn't need to be much cheaper, because in some cases the owners accept to pay even higher prices because it creates a lot of value for them. For instance, in legacy cities like Delhi or Paris, so it frees the rooftops. So on the rooftops, the building owner can do other things. He can put green agriculture, which contributes to green in the city. He can put a swimming pool. He can use the surface for other usages, which creates a lot of value if you have hotels or museums. So that's one value creation. Another one is that they don't need to manage any technical installation. So they completely outsource all the boring stuff, the maintenance, the risks. We guarantee, and as you are well aware, Tabrid has a fantastic job. In the last 20 years, there's never been a building cut off. So it brings complete resilience and the peace of mind to the building owner, which has also value. And of course, with the carbon tax in Europe now, the dramatic reduction in CO2 emission, and the fact that it's 100% green because we have corporate PPAs, also we use electricity. So we provide from green corporate PPAs, and we use free cooling. So in places also in India where we have access to river, a lake, or the sea, you benefit from this free cooling, which also dramatically increase the coefficient of performance, so the energy efficiency. So all of this creates a lot of value to the building owners and operators. So in many cases, at least in Paris, they accept to pay even a little more than they would, because it's a no-brainer for them. It creates so much value that they sign anyway. I don't know if that helps.
Awesome. Absolutely, spot on. I think thanks for that, Michael. I think that really helps, and at least gives me a lot of perspective in terms of how you're approaching it and what the benefits are, right? And now flying back from Paris straight to India, I'll probably go on to Dushyant from Tata Realty. And of course, Dushyant, I mean, whilst we talk of district cooling and all these concepts, which are working quite well in many parts of the world, as a developer like Tata Realty, you of course can't wait for the system to wake up. You still need to continue grow the way you're growing and develop and build high quality, good grade A real estate, or even more sustainable buildings and so on and so forth, right? So how as Trill are you approaching, and if you take, say, maybe an example of your Chennai asset, the Ramanujan IT SEZ, maybe could you elaborate at the SEZ level, what integrated approaches you have adopted in pushing boundaries for building design, which falls within the realm of the green building space, energy performance, discharge management, or minimizing air conditioning demand without necessarily, of course, compromising on thermal comfort, along with the supply side greening initiatives. Anything you can share on how you've been approaching this?
Thanks, Sudhir. Thanks for this opportunity to be part of this panel and speak to everyone here. It's really great to be here. What I would like to actually say is, so at Trill, our leadership actually believes in sustainability and green initiatives. So it's not just, I would say, just for paper. It's actually, the belief is inbuilt into us out here. So each of our buildings, and this includes Ramanujan, right from the design, right from get-go, we ensure that we are designing it so the building can be more sustainable the buildings more, the energy efficiencies that we can gain are higher. So like at Ramanujan, we have a huge landscaped area. We have podiums with green areas, water bodies, which really help reduce the heat island effect. So as a matter of fact, even for, we went as much as we saved the topsoil while construction so that it could be used again for our landscape. So that was the extent to which we went. We've got rainwater harvesting tanks of up to 2100 kiloliters, which really bring down, I would say, a lot of our water requirement. Also, I mean, like I said, right from the design, our buildings, our campuses are designed to be green. So if you look at Ramanujan, the east and the west facades where you get most of the energy coming in have punched windows. So small windows to reduce the energy gain. While on the north and south side, we have large glazings, which can increase your daylight coming into the park as such. You know, these are the kind of small things that help right from the design. And our tenants actually are able to save costs of up to almost 15 to 20% than another fully glazed park, which you would have in other cases. Also, I would say we keep on improving how our systems work. We've got series chillers in place, which increase the efficiencies. So a place like Chennai, where you would see mostly air-cooled chillers, we went for water-cooled and, like I said, series chillers. So, and a modular system, which allows us to really scale up or down depending on how the requirements are. So just as an example, during the last year and a half COVID times, the air conditioning requirements went down to 10%. So we were actually able to reduce our cooling generation itself because our system is very modular. We've also invested in DC lights, VFDs all across. We've also gone ahead with the regeneration of electricity through our high-rise elevators, which generally has a payback period of 2 years. And it works really nicely. You get electricity when the elevator comes down. So that's always a good thing. In addition, we're going ahead with installing a new biomethanation plant. You mentioned earlier about solid waste, which generally gets wasted, but a biomethanation plant will help us really convert that into energy and provide savings. Also, I mean, on the supply side of energy, currently my parks have almost 85 to 90% renewable energy. So we've got an on-site solar plant, plus we've got 2 off-site wind and 1 off-site solar plant that we get electricity from. So almost 85 to 90% of my electricity is green right now. But I think it's the whole integrated design and operations that really help a building perform much better than its peers. And that's what we strive for right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think I had the opportunity to visit the campus you're talking about. And what's impressive is, I mean, whilst we don't have systems on the likes of what Michael mentioned that's in Paris, at least at a community level, you've been able to incorporate aspects of district cooling within what best way that you could to get the best efficiencies you can already. So there is already a lot of energy efficiency, and a lot of these integrated concepts we have that could be done at a city level, you've done within your park itself, right? And now it's more about you kind of adopting what is already out there for your own purposes to make sure at least your developments are more resilient and energy efficient, but not of course having those benefits go through to a much broader area beyond trills developments and so on, where I think the city needs to play a larger role to be able to make those.
No, definitely. I mean, a city, SEZ regulations, all of these need to really help out.
Correct. Absolutely.
I mean, just as an example, we have a service department block right in our campus, but that's not part of SEZ. So we had to set up a separate cooling plant for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Just because we couldn't provide cooling from our SEZ plant, which had the capacity, but we just could not do it.
Yeah. So regulatory considerations and bottlenecks are a key aspect again that come in the way of having more integrated systems for sure. I agree. Right. And so different challenges that we have on the ground. Right. I agree. So thanks for that, Dushyant. Right. And now moving on to, I would say, Shruti, maybe. Shruti, yeah, with C40, the network is growing, and you've got, I think, 5 Indian cities now part of the C40 network, and some of the, like Mumbai and Delhi, have been on this for, I think, 15 years plus now, right? And so on. So, and from what I could see, I mean, Mumbai is the only city of the 5 cities that have also committed to being a part of the municipal building efficiency network as well. So could you elaborate a little more on what this network means and what role cities or the built environment can play in the energy transition to net zero? And how does one align this with financing and mainstreaming it?
Sure. Thank you, Sudhir. And it was actually lovely to hear, all the other panelists and, bringing really home, the different aspects that they've highlighted. And I'll try and summarize some of those, because they really build up a good business case on some of the aspects that we're talking about. But just to highlight that C40 is a network of cities, political leadership at the city level commit to being a part of C40. Currently, we have about 97 cities globally that are a part of C40 network. And as Prashant highlighted, earlier, the cities tend to be, they are one of the most, critical economic centers, right? Urban centers. And, therefore, it's very important role they play in, shaping the decisions that we can make around climate change. The way we work at C40 is that we, really believe that peer-to-peer city learning can really enhance and help the cities structure frameworks, when they learn from other cities, to implement strategies and ideas and projects that they might be considering. So to answer your first question, networks is one of C40's mechanisms and frameworks through which we engage cities, on different focal sort of, areas. And, we have a lot of exchange between other cities, and, there are study tours that are organized, there is sessions around technology, etc. So that's kind of the way networks work. And we kind of leave it up to the city. So it's not like a mandate or anything. It totally depends on cities to join different networks based on their priorities, their bandwidth, the sort of the resources available at cities. So, Mumbai, being a part of the municipal building efficiency network is not any indicator that they're the only ones interested in energy efficiency. So I just want to highlight that all cities in India, we have, like you said, 5 cities, which are all the major metropolitan cities, including Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, Chennai, and Kolkata. They all have and are doing a lot on, energy efficiency. So that's kind of answering your first question. Now, coming to the second one, as highlighted by all my previous panelists, starting from Prashant, who kind of build the business case for how green buildings are critical, and then how cities play, a big role, and then kind of Michael and Dushyant talking about the fact that there are strategies, right, like district energy, cooling being and heating being one, and then from Dushyant on how, purely from a private sector perspective, the decisions that they make, were obviously largely driven, maybe not largely, but are kind of driven by the business case it makes, right? They wouldn't be doing it if there was a loss, right? So clearly there is a business case in going for green, which is kind of established, in the panel already. So, cities, like we're discussing, and the panel is talking about, integration of urban energy systems, they play a big role, right? Because the integration of the different aspects is what's critical, right? So buildings, we all know, are very significant, contributors to GHG emissions, but, alone, they can't do much, right? There has to be sort of how they integrate themselves with cities and the larger infrastructure, which includes everything, right? Not only energy, but water, waste, transportation, everything. It all plays a role, and cities really bring forward, I would say, that opportunity. Not the challenge, but there is a big opportunity that cities present in looking at this in an integrated way. And just to highlight, recently we were looking at how, municipal infrastructure, like the role that, like the amount of pumping energy, so even kind of designing systems for municipal infrastructure that can be efficient is a very critical thing, right? And that can also influence the energy use of a city. So cities play a very important role. And what cities can do is, they can really help in setting a market-based mechanism or triggering that, right? Because if you don't have supply chains, if you don't have a market to go green or to go sustainable or to deliver on climate change, one cannot. And they would always remain a very siloed approach, right? So therefore, working with the city, and that's what C40 believes, that, if we really can get the city mobilized, not only by itself in the actions that it's taking, but also kind of the platform it's creating for leveraging actions from the private sector. And that comes through number one, on policy, the kind of policies that the city can structure around, maybe incentivizing or penalizing, whichever way it works on, buildings or which don't deliver on efficiency. The second is on technology. I think cities can play a very critical role because, city governments are, if they actually experiment on technologies and create pilot and demonstration projects, they do send triggers into, the private sector. Because, I'm sure, having worked with the private sector and, different reality players, there is always this chicken and egg situation, right, of new technologies, like who would do it first, and how does the scale up in the market happen? And, I feel like the cities at that point can really play a very critical role, even maybe through on their own or through public-private partnerships, by, kind of looking at critical technologies and how they can be implemented in, at city levels to sort of, give that triggers to the private sector. Then, of course, when we come to financing, right, none of this is possible if there are no proper and appropriate systems of, financial structures. And cities can really, help in providing that. Platforms, there could be accelerators. We are talking to cities, on looking at how there could be sort of accelerator innovation platforms of looking at, the whole urban, infrastructure systems. And that's important. The other aspect in general that the cities can play a role on, and we are actually working very closely with Mumbai right now, is on climate budgeting. And this is something that, we discussed earlier. So what happens is that, like, and this is something that has come up in discussions with the earlier panelists, that, for example, if a city is always reacting, right? So there is sort of urban flooding that's happening, and we're facing that, right, in Chennai, Mumbai had it. And the city goes back and kind of has to develop that infrastructure again. So there is a certain spend that the city is doing a year-on-year basis in just sort of improving or fixing the infrastructure. Now, if that delta is accounted by the city in the investment, right, in the first cost of what they need to do for creating an infrastructure project first, that's kind of mainstreaming climate in the budgeting of the city, right? Where you change the conversation and you pivot it around what is actually required, and in, creating this sort of climate budgets that become a part of cities making decisions, important decisions around infrastructure, and all of these areas. And I think once that happens, that is the kind of paradigm shift that's required for mainstreaming, some of these aspects around green buildings and climate change. Otherwise, they will remain like small pilot projects or smaller initiatives. The third point that I want to make is, I think there is a governance issue that is there in almost all cities and states. In India, obviously, we know that, cities only have a limited role to play in terms of, the kind of transition they can make to energy, because, the grid and the kind of power purchase agreements or the, things that are happening are at a state or a national level. But of course, we go back to the basic principles, right? If you can reduce your energy use and really look at how you can generate enough energy, within the city boundaries, you can also then start making a case to the state for, better, creating better structures of renewable energy purchase, agreements, etc. And also, the whole idea around DSM, like demand side management, is also something that's really important. And we have to really start looking at how we can leverage some of those, sort of systems for creating this energy transition.
Great. Thanks, Shruti. I think absolutely you've hit the nail on the head in terms of many of the points that you've highlighted, and of course, unless many of these things that you've brought out here kind of come into fruition, it may not necessarily fix the issue around more integrated urban energy systems. And I think the faster and the better each city is able to adopt some of these things, the easier it would become, for example, for the green building movement to gain even more pace than what it has right now. So I think all very, very relevant, important points. Thanks for that. Yeah. And I think moving on now to Benjamin. So Ben, now a precursor to the District Energy in Cities initiative, which you've been leading in India, has been basically the study that you did in 2013, where you surveyed several low carbon cities, and you identified that one of the key success factors in them being able to achieve energy efficiency, have more renewable energy adoption, has been around them having some form of district heating or cooling adoption within the cities itself, right? So, and one may even argue that within the overall planning aspects of a city, as important as what people consider as public infrastructure like power, water, gas, or sewage, you also probably need to have thermal networks, at least for new developments that are happening within the city. Right? So, in your view, could you just provide some insights on why thermal networks for new greenfield master plans to begin with, and probably even targeted brownfield thereafter, are critical for India to decarbonize its energy sector and also improve the quality of life for residents?
Just big asks. I just want to thank CII, IGBC, and Tabreed for inviting UNEP. Yeah, I think, and what's nice is going at the end, I get to hear everyone's answers, so I can build off that. But I think just stepping back, one thing at UNEP we're trying to really, since that 2013 report, really raise the flag on is that with the huge upcoming demands in buildings from cooling, but also shifting to electrification of transport, eventual electrification of industry, we're going to have a huge issue of all the renewable power that we want to build. We need to suck it up into other sectors, which are actually harder to decarbonize. So I'd say industry, agriculture, and transport are harder than buildings. So in the building sector, we need to be looking at how to actually reduce the amount of green power we're going to be using so that those other sectors can decarbonize. And in India, over the next 20 years, we're going to increase the amount of cooling by over 10 times. And already in cities, we've seen a lot of impacts of grid stress due to cooling. If anyone's lived in Delhi, you know that the summer blackout will come, and it happened to me quite a few times. So already we have that issue, and that in 20 years we'll have 10 times as much cooling demand. So all of that to say, we really need to look at alternatives to just using power demand for cooling. And I really liked hearing what Dushyant said about the alternative measures at the building level: passive cooling, design, urban planning with water bodies that reduce the temperature. And then at the very last point, we use the best available technology to provide the cooling. And UNEP, since 2014, when we launched the District Energy Initiative, has been promoting district cooling as that best available technology. And one other point which no one mentioned, which I think is interesting, is this year India signed and ratified the Kigali Amendment, which is part of the Montreal Protocol, one of the most successful environmental treaties we have globally. And that means that India needs to be phasing down the HFC refrigerants used. And district cooling, time and again in countries worldwide, has shown that that's one of the most cost-effective ways and safest ways to do that. We can bring on refrigerants like ammonia, CO2, etc. far easier, and use alternatives which maybe don't need refrigerants, like absorption chillers and the free cooling that Michael mentioned. So there's lots of things going for it. I think to zoom in on the grid side, I think one aspect we're pushing quite hard is when we look at resilience of grid. What's the role that district cooling can provide in flexibility services? A lot of people talk about, okay, solar power is now equity with coal power in India, or even cheaper. But you have all this balancing of services and balancing the grid, which actually is increasing the price. In some countries, that's, you go 1 megawatt of solar, half the cost will be actually balancing its production. So with district cooling, we have thermal storage, which is a thermal way to actually be balancing the system, and it needs to be part of this. I think one of the issues is people really focus on single technologies, like they're like, okay, hydrogen is the answer, or batteries is the answer, but really we need, or interconnection is the answer. Really, we need all the possible solutions to be playing their part. And I think countries that have reached high shares of renewables earlier, like Denmark or Germany, have had a lot of thermal storage and a lot of generation, cogeneration in the cities that have helped them reach that without batteries and without hydrogen. So let's look at those examples that have worked already and then see how that looks in India. And I think what's interesting about India is it's an investment for the future. I think I keep hearing different numbers for it, but at least doubling the amount of real estate over the next 20 years. So this is the perfect time to be planning out district cooling systems. They obviously benefit from being able to look forward how a city's developing. Greenfield is obviously much easier. We can plan all the infrastructure at the same time. You know how much cooling, how much power. You can combine it with systems like putting district cooling pipes with the sewer system, like in Paris, as Michael said. But we shouldn't let the fact that greenfield is easier sort of banish brownfield projects aside. Paris is a shining example of what you can do in a city that already exists to become the largest district cooling system in Europe. With UNEP, we assessed the brownfield project in Tanay, and it was completely cost viable, and we're still trying to take it forward. One of the benefits is you already know what cooling the buildings want. So there's no risk around, will my building come up in 5 years or 10 years? And, having to second guess the real estate development timetable. The real estate's already there. You just need to connect it. So yeah, we're working with the national government and with cities and states to try to look at some of the planning guidelines that would help promote district cooling in greenfield. I think I can talk about that in a bit, but it's really a technology we need to be promoting as hard as possible, and not sort of in 20, 30 years regret that it wasn't picked up early. And just to finish, I think one thing is district cooling is already in India. Like as Dushyant showed, there's already projects, the technology has already been demonstrated. We just got to make the business model, financing, and the permitting process match up, and I think it's got a great potential. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Ben. But I think just as I was listening to you, a question that I also had was, and the point you mentioned on doubling of real estate space across cities in India from this point onwards, right? I mean, what is the way forward? Do you think the market needs to take the lead, where developers like Trill, etc., start adopting this more aggressively, or is it more of a stick approach with regulation coming in place and cities saying this has to be done? I mean, how exactly do you start taking the conversation from just a green building at an individual level to a green building at a community level in a more effective way, and enabling that to happen more effectively? And where do you see?
Yeah, I think if we look at countries globally, the early stage markets of district cooling, district heating, a lot of it was private sector really pushing hard, or very ambitious cities trying to do something. So it's got to start from the bottom up. And I would say the regulation will follow, but it's kind of a chicken and egg. You need to show the problem in order to get the regulation that solves it. But I think one thing, Dushyant, you mentioned earlier, like you're performing better than your peers. I think one really interesting aspect of what district cooling can do is, if you're a leading real estate developer, you can actually incubate and develop a district cooling project that can connect to your peers in the surrounding neighborhood, and then you're actually helping to decarbonize a whole city just from your leadership. And I think that's been seen in a lot of countries. The Klimaspace network, like Michael mentioned, started with just a few buildings and then slowly started connecting others. So the leading real estate developers should look at it for their developments, but also be looking, how can I connect that cinema that's coming up just outside my development, or that hospital, which has got huge cooling bills. So yeah, these different things should follow.
Any views on that, Dushyant? Regulatory aspects, restriction aside, I mean.
No, I think Ben, that makes a lot of sense. as Sudhir mentioned, regulatory aspects are still a concern, but this is something that we are actually looking at our projects in Delhi, where we are talking to developers around our projects who would be willing to have a centralized plant with us. So that's something definitely we are looking at trying to increase and implement.
May I chip in with a question for Dushyant, actually? I'm just thinking, I mean, I suppose you actually own and operate your assets, right? But you do have a business model where you are a developer and you don't have interest in owning and operating. I mean, Tata has other aspects like housing or other aspects. So I'm just wondering, there may be, a good collaboration between a business model that's build and sell, and then one that has a longer, business model where, because one of the aspects that I struggle when we're talking to developers is that they're not long-term, right? Their whole thing is to get out as fast as they can before the damn thing falls. Sorry, just kidding. But the point is that they're not in this business of operating it. They don't want to be tied up with the solar rooftop or whatever else they might be doing. So I think if we can find a complementary structure, we did come across one developer in Brazil, I'm just anecdotally, that was looking at new projects, and they would tell the new developers, that do not put your plant room, we will run it for you. And, I suppose that is your business model, but, if you can find more like that, and that was a co-generation, thinking where it's actually tri-generation in a way, but yeah, so it'll be great to kind of see if we can bring that together, especially for townships, especially for commercial developments, business districts, something like that.
Oh, definitely, Prashant. So if we look at all of our commercial properties, that's where we build and operate them. So that's not something we just sell across. And in most of our current commercial parks, we provide the cooling services to all our tenants. So we would have a centralized plant like Ramanujan IT City, that's what he mentioned previously. It's a park with 6 buildings, over 6 million square feet of leasable area. And we just have 2 plants which cater to the requirement for all of those buildings. We have systems in place where each client gets billed based on their usage. But yes, that's how it works. And on the other hand, we have our Tata Housing projects, which we build and sell. So in those, it's still, I would say the cooling plant is more, it's more individual based. So houses still don't have central cooling here in India currently. And that's something which we are trying to encourage. We have a township coming up in Bangalore where it'll be a multi-use township with commercial, retail, housing as well. And that's where we are trying to really look at ways in which we can provide these kind of district cooling systems.
Great, thanks for that, Prashant and Prashant. I think I'd love to go on because I have a lot of questions as well, but I'll just probably, given the time that we have, I'm just seeing what questions we've got from the audience, and probably I'm just going to start directing them to each of you. I mean, so the first question is, Prashant, to you. What exactly is Apex? Is it applicable in India, and how does it work? You're on mute, Prashant.
So, Sudhir, I wasn't prepared to show slides, but maybe it's simpler just to show the two, or at least a quick sort of set of slides of it. Is that okay?
Yeah, maybe in 2-3 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. No, sure. I'll keep it short. Yeah. So, sorry. I don't know if you can see this.
Yeah, it's clear.
I should have been more prepared, but sorry. So I just go straight to it. So basically, it is a tool that has database for many. Right now, has 350 cities in emerging markets mostly, and we are increasing it. So we just did a survey of 14 cities, across India, just the top ones that we feel we can, invest in and just try to start the conversation with. And so it has base layer of data already. Plus, we've got what we call publicly available data we capture and we make it a little bit more sharper. And then the idea is that we could engage with any city in South Asia or anywhere in emerging markets, and then take the conversation further. And I'll just show you a quick glimpse of it. So, you put in your city, let's say Chennai. It quickly, using the data you have, it can do the kind of comparison of across the cities, as well as within that, so I was telling you about the buildings being a significant part. You can see buildings and transport is huge. But if you go to the built environment, it gives you a whole bunch of options. It tells you where your current emissions is. I think the big thing, Michael and Ben both mentioned that, there's going to be huge growth coming, right? So it's not just the existing stuff, but and just getting the cities to realize, actually, if you think your problem is bad now, in 10 years, it's almost going to double. And how on earth are you going to, get there, right? And I think this is where the conversation about integrated systems or district systems could be quite meaningful if you put it in this context and say, okay, how is that going to work, right? And then within this, you have options. You can look at, I don't want to go into the nitty-gritties, but you get the sense. This is your business as usual. This is the improved case. We are still in that sort of initial stage where we are testing it on our own clients for now. The idea is to partner with people like C40 and others to really start to kind of, open this up and let everyone be able to use it.
Sure. And I think also, given the work that the Smart City mission is doing in India and the amount of command centers coming up and so on, probably that could be another avenue to kind of look at rolling sort in a broader perspective in India, right? I mean, because
absolutely,
it has been, yeah. Interesting, very interesting. Great. Thanks for this, Prashant. And just moving on to the next question, probably Ben, you could take this. With both government and private developers playing a part in the development of cities, how can we implement district cooling technologies in India? I think you kind of answered this, but I mean, is there anything further you'd like to add in terms of how district cooling adoption could happen in a more effective, faster way?
No, one thing to add, I think, is obviously you need the planning permissions to come through, and national, state, and city level. There are some barriers we've identified in a report we published. I think one other thing to highlight is, and I can't remember who said it, but obviously municipal budgets aren't going to be able to support huge district cooling systems. There's a huge amount of private, I think Prash said it actually, huge amount of private finance can come in for this. But the city does need to play that sort of role of coordinating and bringing it on board. So really close collaboration, I'd say, is the main thing that needs to come out.
Got it. And I think just a follow-on question to that, whilst district cooling is feasible for greenfield, what about brownfield, the point you mentioned where you can't ignore that, and you've given the Thane example, which is a great example. But Thane, that specific example as well, because we kind of looked at it in the past, was feasible because of the nature of the developers who are already out there. They're all still largely malls, hospitals, and corporate offices and so on. So it could be possible, but I mean, is there a case generally in India, given the congestion issues and given urban planning issues of the current built environment, for a possible district cooling adoption within the current built environment of the country? That's challenging.
Yeah, maybe I'm not the best to answer it, but I think 100%, yeah. And I think what would be, I think it needs testing, and that's why it'd be great that Thane 1 can be picked up. But even if an existing district cooling system exists, like the one Dushyant you mentioned, just trying to connect one other building next door to it, trying to test that regulatory the issues. Technically, in terms of digging under roads, there are solutions for it which can minimize congestion. There's one pipe company in Europe called Thermoflex that can lay roads in a day. So we've really like reduced the amount of congestion happening. So yeah, 100% possible.
Great. The next question is to Shruti. I think, I mean, whilst you did answer this, the question is, what is C40? And just adding on to that, can you shed more light on achievements made in implementing a DSM strategy, and how can it be taken to the next level? Is it through C40 or just broadly things that you're supporting?
So thank you, Sudhir. So C40 is a network of cities. It's we bring together. It's a a global nonprofit that brings cities together. To basically tackle and commit on climate action. And the way we work is that it's only for large megapolis cities. So we have a criteria for cities that can become members of C40, and the cities approach us based on their interests and and commitment on climate change. Once they approach us, we have a process of taking them through an approval process by our steering committee, which is basically includes mayors and political leaders from the network of cities already. Our new chair has just been announced as the mayor of London, was originally, the mayor of Los Angeles, Mayor Eric Garcetti, and now that's been handed over, so Mayor Sadiq Khan is going to be the new chair for C40. So it's basically chaired by political leaders of cities. So it's kind of a city-led, organization, and we work on, so any city that becomes a part of C40 has to commit and, sort of the performance is gauged every year based on leadership standards. So it's not that any city can just become a C40 city and not perform or commit. And some of the significant aspects of the leadership standards are, finishing and finalizing a climate action plan, which is very critical. So we have, if you go on our website, you'll see several cities around that are C40 members have finished a climate action plan, which basically gives a tangible tool, for developing projects that one can take for climate action on ground, that can also help you in, raising money or, sort of looking at green bonds. So that's C40 in general, but I'm happy to, take any questions post the panel if you have on C40 in specific. And in terms of DSM, so, C40 basically through its network, works with cities. So we don't implement the demand side. So we haven't implemented it, but a lot of our cities have actually done demand side management systems very successfully. And I'm happy to share examples. For example, Dubai is, we've been recently talking to Dubai on, what all they have done on demand side management, and they have been fairly successful in that. There are several other cities in Latin America that have been, experimenting with this. We're also talking to Mumbai on looking and exploring this, the systems around demand side management and how it can work. So again, happy to share, specific details of cities. We also have on our website, a knowledge hub where we actually post case studies from cities. So if you're interested in a specific, technology or, or some aspect, please do write to us and we'll be able to, guide you through our website or provide you with related materials on that specific technology. So I don't know, Sudhir, if I was able to address that.
I think that's clear, Shruti. Thanks for that. Since we've got in the 5 to 7 minutes, I'll probably just pose 2 additional questions to each of you. I mean, so I'll start with Prashant. Prashant, I mean, I think the Edge tool, personally, I think I quite love it in terms of how it's been built and how you've demystified the whole process of green building design and made it super accessible to be able to, in a very easy, simplistic way, be able to plan greener, more resource efficient buildings, right? I mean, not only from an energy performance standpoint, but also from an overall, I mean, embodied carbon that goes in, which something isn't as actively looked in right now, but people should start looking in a lot more into the embodied carbon into buildings, right? I mean, so basis, since it's been there for a few years now, if you had to draw out, say, 2 or 3 key insights of what, again, within the Indian context, what practices could be adopted generally by the developers or urban planners, architects in the country, of what you see as a trend on Edge. Can you just, I mean, highlight 2 or 3 specific design considerations, which are super easy, improve the green ratings big time, short paybacks, but aren't being done or should be done?
Thanks, Sudhir. And thanks for the kind words on Edge, actually. Yeah, so I think Prashant kind of mentioned some of these, actually. It's a sort of low-hanging fruit that seem like an obvious thing. I think, sometimes you feel, anyway, that it's a bit silly even mentioning these things when actually, these things are so sort of pedestrian in a sense, but they need to be done, and yet they don't get done, right? Because it's not yet known. I think the whole So I think the two that stick out to me, one is the amount of glass in buildings. I think it's tremendous the amount that goes into this, and there's so much misconception about glass being good for you, and this is overconsumption, a bit like protein. Excessive protein is not good for you, right? So, but there's this whole thing that daylight but up to 30%, anything beyond that is not going to bring much more glass, especially the lower part of the window. So things like that sort of, and the other thing within that space, people don't even realize that actually glazing is more expensive than the wall, right? Because especially with high performance glass and stuff, that they'll end up compensating in order to meet some of the standards in terms of keeping the load down or regulations. Just simply, redesigning. You don't have to do the 60s long strips of glass. You can still be innovative and do that. And in that same spirit, kind of having better shading. I think we need to make it sexier again to bring those aspects forward. I know there's a certain kind of sort of easiness of maintaining glass facade. It's a practical thing, but I think if we can bring that together, would be terrific. And lastly, I think somebody touched on the cooling aspect. I feel like the sort of DX units and those kind of things are really they're much easier if you can find a way to have better cooling systems and not necessarily too much more money added to it. So I'm thinking more commercial buildings now. So those would be my two picks in commercial, and in residential. Hot water seems to have fallen off as a nice thing. Particularly, it's such a practical thing that it seems to get off. It doesn't come on the list of many developers unless it's expected. I think you see that a little bit in Bangalore where it's asked for. Just simple hot water systems. Even if it seems like this is low-income housing, they don't use hot water. Eventually, they tend to. And we've been doing a survey for one of the banks, Avas, where sort of the SME banks that do. And they're doing rural housing and things like that, sort of self-built house. So even there, we find there's a heating load from hot water, and they're just immersion rods or even like hangers that they put in the, so all of that is just wasted electricity to convert heat. And if we can just find a way to make people's life a little more comfortable by having solar hot water systems, things like that would make it a lot of difference. Yeah, is what I would say. Got it.
Thanks. And I'm sure I was seeing Dushyant, he basically was pretty much, the look he had was, we do all that plus more. And I'm sure. so, and you'd like to add anything to that, Dushyant, or beyond what Prashant said, or a simple hacks, if you have to call it that way, to just make
No, I think, so even way back when I was doing my architecture, this was one of my favorite topics. Solar passive architecture was what we called it at the time. And it's really surprising why people still don't look at it. Glass boxes are in fashion, and that's really sad, unfortunately.
Yeah. Clear. And I think my last question is to you, Michael, again. Beyond what you've done for the city of Paris, and given, whilst, I mean, of course, there is one ambition for buildings to become net zero, and there's a lot more of that happening. I've seen that NG is also kind of moving towards having net zero communities or net zero districts, and looking at much more larger integrated concepts of this kind. So any case studies that you'd like to share, or any projects where you're currently looking at, where right from the word go, you're looking at much more innovative, holistic, larger scale approaches towards planning some of these concepts?
Yes, Studio, I think some of our experience that could be transposable and useful for India is, for instance, what we have done in the US with universities. Because our purpose is to accompany our customers on the road towards carbon neutrality. And we found that it's easier to tackle with universities or some districts or smaller sized cities, because actually the technology is there. As Benjamin Hickman from UNEP clearly explained, I mean, Scandinavian cities have done it. In a way, and in some contracts we have done it, we're going to do it. So it's more a question of regulation and vision and decision makers which make it possible to have complex integrated systems. Like you explained, tri-generation. So we know that smart thermal and electrical grids are the backbones of sustainable cities or territories. And concrete case studies are, for instance, the Ohio State University, where we signed a 50-year PPP in 2017. So we have yet now 4 or 5 years background, and it's a true success because when we signed the contract, one of the KPIs was to reduce energy consumption by 25% in 10 years, and in parallel to reduce procurement of energy outside of the campus by 25%. So now that we are close to 5 years, we are really reaching 35%. So in half the time, we did much more than was contractually we signed for. And we are helping the university to put PV on the rooftops, to make a biomethane plant with the waste food they have on the campus. Energy conservation measures are a great success. So, I mean, we prove concretely that it's doable, and it's not rocket science, it's existing technologies. Just we need to have the decision makers and regulators allow us to put these integrated complex systems. So I want to just close with the first slide you show from Ben in the introduction. I fully agree. You have to avoid silos, which is unfortunately all over the world, it's tendered in silos. We need to find a way to do these complex integrated systems. And that's the most efficient, the fastest way to reach carbon neutrality. So it's kind of frustrating for me because we know how to do it. And all over the world, there are only a limited number of places which actually allow us to do it. So I would really very strongly encourage decision makers in India to do it in smaller cities, in districts, in universities, where it's more easily manageable, to have some lighthouse projects, and then to expand in larger urban centers, because that's, of course, it's more difficult. So to summarize, we know how to do it. UNEP has done a fantastic work. I think Tabrid is part of the solution, and just we need to convince decision makers to implement it.
Got it. Perfect. Thanks for that, Michael. And I think, so I've got no further questions unless either of you have any for the other, but I mean, it's been a great conversation, quite insightful for me personally, and I hope at least for the audience as well. Sandeep or Srinivas, I mean, I don't know how much time we have, but for closing, if we are fine with this, we could move on to the next section to close it. Thank you again, everyone. Thanks for your time and thanks for your contribution to this. But yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudhir.
Thanks.
Yeah, Mr. Sudhir, I request you to conclude this session.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So I think, I mean, some of the key takeaways, okay, if from all our conversations are clearly, while what is being done at the building level for green buildings is already, I mean, in a way, quite promising. And there's been a great amount of progress from where the industry was, let's say, 20 years ago in India to where it's got to right now. And within the limitations of the system that are there, it looks like at least there's been a fair amount of progress. But of course, that progress can only translate into a much larger, broader scale through looking at things in a more integrated approach. Cities need to play a larger role to be able to address some of these, I would say, institutional voids that are currently out there right now to be able to advance the green building agenda. Like Ben mentioned, it has to be a combination of both market-led as well as regulatory-led. It can't just be one way or the other. It's always chicken and egg. So you need to have some of these initial pilots where the private sector, like NG did in Paris, needs to come forward to be able to invest, own, operate, and execute these kind of integrated systems at as small a scale as possible or as large a scale as practically possible. And tools like Apex, of course, help in accelerating this and enabling cities to be able to make more conscious, active, and informed choices because it's all evidence-based. And I suppose that whilst data right now is from various public sources, as there is more use of this and as more cities get onto the network, probably the reliability of this and the use of this could get more relevant, right? And networks like C40 kind of plug in quite well into that because it's all about trying to ensure that it's not a question of technology, it's not a question of, I would say, financing, because there is abundant capital available, there's abundant use cases available. It's purely about making sure that that gap could be bridged between what is already out there and what needs to be done in a more effective way with much lesser execution risk in doing projects of this kind, right? And that's where, I mean, I think organizations like C40 play a great role in enabling that that knowledge sharing to happen. And since it's city led, it kind of makes it a lot more effective for other cities to follow suit. And private developers like Trill already are doing what best they can. They're kind of leading the way in terms of incorporating passive design elements into the overall green building agenda. And more than just a certification, which I think, at least personally, I've seen quite a bit in India, where I mean, a big part of the focus is on certification, and from certification to actually execution, there are a lot of gaps. But the intent is a lot more in terms of making sure that the design intent translates into tangible on-ground action, and that's what Trill has been doing with continuous, constant, I would say, innovations plus investments being made from time to time to ensure that the overall sustainability aspects could be taken, because there's a clear business case for that. Right. So that's broadly some of the key takeaways for me personally, at least. And yeah, thank you again, everyone. Thanks a lot for the super insightful discussion. And unless you have anything, Sandeep, we could probably close with this.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Sandeep. Sudhir.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure and honor. Thank you.
Yeah, it was a great session. All the panelists have given their great inputs on the urban energy systems for green buildings. And I also wanted to thank all the participants for their patient listening and making this session very interactive. Thank you so much. With that, we'll conclude this session. Have a great evening.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.